The terminal was alive with noise-rolling suitcases, half-heard conversations, the sharp voice of a child tugging on her mother's coat. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, but all she noticed was the man sitting 3 rows ahead of her, his face turned away, his shoulders rigid. People passed between them, blurred shapes in motion. Yet her gaze refused to leave him. The girl sat perfectly still, a small suitcase by her side, its corners scuffed and fabric worn thin from too many journeys. A red scarf dangled loosely from her wrists, fluttering whenever the air conditioning cut on, like it was trying to speak for her. She twisted the scarf between her fingers until they turned pale, the thread biting against her skin. She couldn't hear his voice, he hadn't spoken since. He sat down, but his silence felt heavier than the announcements echoing overhead. Every so often, he looked down at something in his hands, slipping it quickly into his jacket when anyone passed too close. She couldn't see what it was, only the way his grip trembled. Her chest tightened. The scarf slipped, nearly falling to the floor, but she caught it just in time. She told herself it was nothing, just a stranger waiting for a bus, maybe late for work, maybe missing someone. Yet the air around him felt wrong, sharp like the edge of glass. A cracked watch clung to her own wrist, its second hand frozen, refusing to move forward. It had stopped months ago, but she wore it anyway, a reminder of something she still couldn't name. She raised her wrist now, eyes flicking from the broken clock to the man in front of her. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, lips moving as if rehearsing something she couldn't hear. Someone brushed past her, muttering an apology. She barely nodded. All she could see was his hand tightening into a fist, then opening again, fingers trembling as though the weight of what he carried was too much. Her pulse quickened. For a moment, the noise around her dimmed, replaced by the sound of her own breathing ragged uneven. She gripped her scarf tighter, as if its red thread could tether her to this moment, keep her from slipping into panic. The man shifted suddenly, glancing over his shoulder. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, dark, hollow, searching. Her breath caught, a chill crawling down her spine. He turned away just as quickly, but something in his expression stayed with her, something that whispered of danger she couldn't yet name. The announcement board flickered. People hurried past. The scarf trembled in her hands. She leaned forward, unable to stop herself from staring, and in that charged silence, she knew something was about to break. The scarf slipped again, brushing her knee as she held it tighter, the fabric rough with age. It wasn't just cloth, it carried the faint smell of her father's cologne, worn into its threads from winters long gone. She remembered the way he used to drape it around her neck when she was a child, laughing at her protests. "Keep it close," he had said once, bending down so his voice was almost a whisper, "because one day you'll need something to remind you who you are." Now, sitting among strangers in a station that felt like nowhere, she wondered if he had meant this exact moment. Her fingers traced the frayed edge, the places where the thread had loosened. Every unraveling strand seemed to mirror her own. She leaned back and watched the crowd move around her. Families folded into each other's arms, friends shouted names and clapped backs, lovers kissed like they hadn't seen each other in years. She swallowed hard, lowering her gaze. She had no one waiting, no arms ready to catch her, just a suitcase filled with more questions than answers. And that scarf, always the scarf. Her cracked watch glinted faintly under the harsh station light. She turned her wrist, watching the frozen second hand. Time had stopped for her the day her father left and never came back. Some nights she convinced herself he would return, stepping through the door with that same warm laugh. Other nights, she knew better. She wore the watch not because it worked, but because it was proof of something unfinished, something she wasn't ready to let go of. She pulled her knees closer, shrinking into herself, and glanced again at the man. He hadn't moved much, still leaning forward, still holding whatever he kept hidden in his jacket. But now, she realized, he was watching her too. Not openly, never directly, but in those small sidelong glances when he thought she wasn't looking. His silence was deliberate, his stillness too heavy to ignore. Her chest tightened. Did he see the cracks in her? Could he sense the way loneliness pressed against her ribs? The way she carried her hunger and debt and grief all at once, like invisible luggage no one offered to help with. A mother and daughter passed by, the little girl tugging at a balloon string. She followed it with her eyes until it disappeared into the crowd. Something inside her ached so sharply she nearly stood up. But then his eyes caught hers again. This time, he didn't look away. There was no smile, no greeting, just the weight of his gaze, cold and unblinking. She fumbled with the scarf, her breath uneven. The loudspeaker crackled overhead. Her bus number echoed through the terminal. She rose slowly, gripping the suitcase handle, but halfway to the gate, she stopped. She felt him rise to dot, and when she turned back, he was already watching, as though he'd been waiting for her hesitation. Rain began in whispers against the glass walls of the terminal. First a soft tapping, then heavier, until the sound swallowed the announcements and footsteps alike. The girl stood by the gate, suitcase handle damp under her palm, scarf clinging to her wrist like a question she couldn't answer. She should have boarded already, should have been halfway down the aisle of the bus. But her eyes refused to leave him. The man had moved closer, not enough to seem intentional, but close enough that she could see more the frayed edges of his shoes, soles worn thin as if he'd walked miles with no clear destination. His jacket sagged, pocket heavy with whatever he'd hidden there. For a fleeting second, she caught sight of a wallet slipping as he reached for something. A small photograph peeked out, creased, water damaged, but still holding the shape of two figures. A boy smiling too brightly, a younger man with tired eyes. Her chest ached. The way he pressed the wallet back inside, almost violently, told her the photo was both an anchor and a wound. She knew that feeling to weld the scarf around her wrist, the cracked watch on her arm. He carried ghosts just as she did. Thunder rumbled overhead, shaking the windows. The sound echoed in her ribs. She turned toward the gate, foot shifting forward, but her body refused to follow through. Something in him pulled her back, an invisible mirror reflecting her own fractures. She told herself it was empathy, or maybe warning, but it also felt like gravity, dangerous and irresistible. Her thoughts tangled. He's a stranger. You don't owe him your gaze. You don't owe him anything. But another voice whispered, what if he understands the emptiness? What if he's the only one who does? She saw his hands tremble again, not from weakness, but from holding too much inside. She thought of her father's hands, steady even when life had nothing left to give. The scarf brushed her wrists as if reminding her that symbols can save or destroy. A gust of cold air rushed in as someone opened the side door, bringing the smell of wet pavement. Passengers hurried toward the bus, hoods pulled up, shoulders hunched. She was supposed to be one of them, leaving this place behind. Yet her suitcase remained routed, wheels unmoving against the floor. He looked up then, meeting her eyes across the thinning crowd. Rain streaked the glass behind him, distorting his shape, making him appear both present and unreal. For the first time, he gave the faintest smile, confused, almost broken, as if he hadn't meant to. Her pulse leaped. The driver called, last boarding. She tightened her grip on the scarf. One step forward, one step back. And in the storm of her hesitation, she no longer knew if she was running from him or toward him. Her suitcase rattled softly as she dragged it a few steps closer to the gate. The driver was calling names now, impatient, tapping his pen against the clipboard. Rain blurred the world outside, streaks of silver light bending the neon reflections. She swallowed hard, forcing her breath steady. Just go. Step on the bus. Don't look back. But she did. One last glance over her shoulder. And there he was, still standing in the same half-shadow, his jacket damp at the shoulders, hair slicked darker by the storm. He wasn't moving toward her, wasn't reaching out, but his eyes clung to her like a hand she couldn't shake off. She nearly let go of the suitcase handle. Her legs trembled, half a breath away from giving in. Something in her chest twisted so tight, she thought she might collapse right there on the station floor. Some people carry more than just bags, she whispered under her breath, voice trembling. They carry silence. Her scarf slipped again. She bent quickly to catch it, but this time it wasn't her hand that reached first. It was his. The red cloth dangled between them for a heartbeat, his fingers brushing the fabric before he slowly placed it back into her palm. He said nothing, only looked at her as if the scarf meant more than she'd ever admitted, even to herself. A woman passing by muttered, "Move out of the way," glaring at them like they were an inconvenience. The girl stepped back, clutching the scarf close to her chest. She could feel the judgment pressing down, the unspoken rules of strangers: don't linger, don't connect, don't look too long. But they were already past that. Her cracked watch caught the light as she lifted her wrist to brush away the strands of wet hair sticking to her face. He noticed it. His gaze softened for a flicker of a moment, recognition, maybe, or his own reflection in the brokenness of it. The bus door groaned open wider. The driver sighed, checked his watch, muttered something about delays. Behind her, a man in a gray coat muttered, "Young people, always lost in themselves." She almost laughed at the bitterness of it, but the sound wouldn't come. Instead, she stood frozen, clutching her scarf. The silence between her and the stranger, heavy enough to drown out everything else. The storm outside cracked with thunder, shaking the glass. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Jaw tightening, she felt her knees weaken, heart pulling in two directions. And though the bus engine roared, though the world kept moving, she stayed still, caught between leaving and staying, between fear and something dangerously close to understanding. The scarf trembled in her hand, and the moment held, unbroken, unbearably alive. The bus hissed, brakes loosening, the driver's voice sharper now. Last call. The girl's pulse raced as she clutched her scarf, torn between the safety of leaving and the gravity of staying. She turned away at last, dragging her suitcase toward the door. But halfway there, something made her stop. A piece of paper had slipped from his jacket when he leaned forward earlier. Now it lay half hidden beneath the chair leg. She bent quickly, almost without thinking, and picked it up. The edges were damp, ink bleeding, but she could still make out the letterhead, Larkin Industries. Her breath caught. That was the company she had applied to just last week. Her one fragile hope for pulling herself out of debt. Her eyes flicked back to him. He was watching her closely, too closely, not with surprise that she'd seen the letter, but with the quiet acceptance of someone who already knew she would. The scarf trembled in her grip. You work there, she whispered, more to herself than to him. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled the photograph from his wallet, slowly this time, placing it on the empty seat between them. She stepped closer. Her breath faltered. The child in the picture wore her scarf, the same frayed red, draped around a small neck, laughter frozen in time. Her knees weakened. That was hers. His voice came at last, rough, almost breaking. She never took it off. Even the day He stopped. His fingers curled over the photo as if words were too heavy to finish. Her father's voice came rushing back, the old memory like a knife. Keep it close, because one day you'll need something to remind you who you are. But what if the reminder wasn't hers alone? What if it carried two ghosts instead of one? The scarf burned against her skin now, heavier than ever. She felt as if she were wearing someone else's grief as her own, and yet she couldn't let go, not now. Thunder cracked again, outside. She thought of the broken watch, of time frozen on her wrist, refusing to move forward, and suddenly the words she'd whispered earlier echoed back, sharp in her mind. Some people carry more than just bags. They carry silence. This silence was no longer his alone. It was hers too. The driver barked again. Last passenger. But she knew, deep in her chest, that she wasn't boarding. The bus could leave. Let it. Her suitcase slipped from her hand, wheels rolling back softly against the floor. She lifted the scarf, stared at it once more, then at him. And when he turned toward the hallway leading out of the terminal, she followed her choice, no longer about buses or jobs, but about stepping into a room where everything she thought she knew would change. The hallway was nearly empty, its fluorescent lights flickering as if the storm outside had seeped in. Rainwater tracked across the tiles where hurried shoes had passed, leaving ghostly trails that vanished as quickly as they appeared. She followed him without knowing why, suitcase abandoned, scarf clutched like a lifeline. He stopped at the end of the corridor, near a glass door rattling in the wind. For the first time, he turned fully toward her. The shadows that had hidden his face were gone, and she could see him clearly now, the deep lines carved by years of exhaustion, eyes bruised by loss, lips pressed thin around words he hadn't said aloud in a long time. You shouldn't have followed me, he said softly. His voice was steady but frayed at the edges, like a string pulled too tight. She swallowed, her throat dry. Then why did you leave the photo where I could see it? His gaze dropped, jaw tightening. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached forward and touched the edge of the scarf hanging from her wrist. His hand lingered there for a moment, too long before pulling back. She wore this, he said, voice breaking now. She was about your age. Same way of holding things too tightly. Same way of staring like the world owes you answers. Her breath trembled. And you see her in me. He nodded once. A single, heavy movement. You remind me of what I lost, and what I failed to stop. The storm cracked overhead, thunder vibrating through the walls. She felt suddenly exposed, caught between his grief and her own. She had thought this scarf was hers, her father's voice, her memories, but now it was both of theirs, binding them in ways neither could untangle. She wanted to hand it back, to free herself of the weight, but her hands refused. Instead, she whispered, maybe it doesn't belong to either of us anymore. Maybe it just belongs to the silence. He looked at her, something unspoken in his eyes, recognition, surrender, maybe even forgiveness for himself. Slowly, he reached into his jacket again. This time it wasn't a wallet or a letter, but the small folded paper with the company name, smeared and nearly ruined. He pressed it into her palm. "You'll need this more than me," he murmured. "I was never going back." Her chest tightened. She wanted to ask what he meant, but his expression stopped. This wasn't a man planning a future. This was a man giving his last piece of it away. The scarf slid loose, falling between them. Neither of them bent to pick it up. For a long moment, they simply stood there, two strangers bound by threads of memory and loss. Then he stepped back toward the door, rain spilling in as it opened, swallowing him whole. She stayed frozen, staring at the scarf on the floor, at the paper in her hand, at the empty space he left behind. The terminal seemed quieter now, different, and when she finally turned to leave, she whispered to herself, as though answering the silence he left, "Not every stranger you help is meant to stay, but some leave you changed forever." The storm had passed by morning. The station looked different in daylight, less haunted, more ordinary. People hurried past with their bags. Children pressed sticky fingers to the glass. Voices carried with the hum of routine. She walked through it all quietly, her suitcase rolling behind her this time. No longer abandoned, the red scarf was folded inside now, not wrapped around her wrist. Its fabric still carried the faint trace of his touch, as though grief could leave fingerprints. She wasn't ready to wear it anymore. Not yet. But she couldn't throw it away either. So it rested inside, between clothes and papers, like a reminder that weight can be shared, even for a moment. Her cracked watch still clung to her wrist. Frozen time, second-hand, unmoving, but instead of shame, she felt something else. Not every broken thing needed fixing. Some things were meant to remain as proof. Proof of where she had stood, who she had met, what she had survived. She found herself whispering the words she once wished someone had told her. Sometimes love is not romance, it's recognition. Recognition of another soul carrying silence, of a mirror held up when you least expect it. The company letter he had pressed into her hand was still there, folded and worn. She hadn't decided if she would send it in, if she would claim the opportunity he had passed on. Maybe she would, maybe she wouldn't. For now, it was enough to know she had been given it, entrusted with something she had not asked for, but could not ignore. Later that evening, she placed the scarf in a drawer by her bed, carefully smoothed beneath the warm glow of a lamp. It lay there as if sleeping, as if waiting. She touched it once, lightly, then closed the drawer. Some memories had to rest. Outside, the city breathed. Rain-soaked streets reflected amber light. She walked through them slowly, her steps softer, steadier. Each reflection she passed seemed to carry pieces of herself, fragments she thought she had lost but now saw differently. She didn't know if she'd see him again. Maybe he was already gone for good, swallowed by the storm he carried. But that wasn't the point anymore. He had left her something, not answers, not promises, but a shift. And as she stood at the corner, watching the traffic lights change from red to green, she thought, some encounters are not chapters in your life, but margin-scribbled notes you'll never forget. And sometimes the strangers who leave you are the ones who stay the longest.